Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am coming to you with my January wrap up. I honestly cannot believe that January is already over, even though throughout the month I really did think it was a very long month. I had two really great standouts this month, two of my favorites of the year. I definitely think they'll be on my favorites of 2023, but the rest of the month feels kind of lackluster to me and pretty forgettable. A lot was going on for me in January, so my posting was sporadic. So I apologize for that, but January wound up being a very busy month for me. And so reading is something that fell by the wayside entirely. So what I did read, I feel like just wasn't that memorable to me. But let's go on and get into the books. The first book that I finished this year is one that I actually started at the very end of 2022, and that is The Last of the Talons. This is a Korean mythology inspired fantasy. I think it's YA. And I thoroughly enjoyed this. The setup feels very Fae-like to me, but it also has kind of a Death and the Maiden type vibe. I really enjoyed this, and I think I largely enjoyed it because of the romance, but there were just a bunch of elements present in this that I tend to enjoy elsewhere. So one of the elements was kind of like a gang storyline, which I really enjoyed. One was kind of like going into a different world, akin to like going into the Fae realm, which I also tend to really enjoy. And I don't know much about Korean mythology, so this was really exciting to me to get exposed to things that I'm not all that familiar with. And one thing that I have to say, I'm just really grateful that I watched a K-drama last year. My favorite show of the year last year was called Tale of the Nine-Tailed, and it focused quite a bit on Korean mythology, and it spoke at length about things that popped up in this book. So I felt like I was prepared to read this. This wasn't a direct myth retelling. This wasn't retelling a specific myth, but it was very much influenced by Korean mythology and also, weirdly enough, the Pied Piper. So it kind of also was feeding off of German influence, which I thought really worked well. I know when I say it like that, it sounds like it's going to be pretty bizarre, but it really worked well for me in this story. I just thoroughly enjoyed this. I think I rated it 4 stars. As time has gone on, this one has fallen quite a bit for me, sadly enough. I don't think about it very often, but when I immediately finished it, I thought, oh, I need to have the second in the series immediately. But I really thought the romance was the strong suit here. It was really good. I loved the male lead. Just absolutely adored him. And while this wasn't straightforwardly a romance book, I think romance was kind of the heart of it. What I really was into, though, a lot of the time was the side characters, and I really wanted more from them. So I think it would be interesting if, as the series carries on, that the focus is not on the main characters of this book, but on some of the side characters, because I thought they were really interesting. I had a great time with this, and that is something that I really needed this month with a lot going on. I just needed something that kind of gives your brain a break, and I felt like this gave that to me. I really thoroughly enjoyed this, but like I said, as time has gone on, I don't know that I would give it 5 stars anymore. Maybe it's more of a 3-star read. I then read The Roman Lives of Plutarch, and this is kind of going in conjunction with my year-long project to read more ancient literature. And there were several lives included in this collection that I don't believe I had read before. So this was a collection that was done by Oxford, and I enjoyed the translation. And to me, part of the time, the translation, it wasn't weird, it wasn't funky, but I didn't really jive with it a lot of the time. I don't really like when they update language too much for ancient classics. And I saw a meme the other day, literally, I saw a meme the other day and it was so me, and it was a guy like reading a book to his grandchild, and he said, I could make this approachable, but that would be inauthentic to the original Greek. And I thought, that is so me. That is so me with translations, because definitely this translation is approachable. If you have never read an ancient classic, you could pick this up, and I don't think you would be confused. I thought the notes in this were excellent. The thing is, this was a selection of 8 Roman lives, and it spanned kind of from the 200s BC, the Second Punic War, up to the fall of the Republic and Julius Caesar. And I think the entire collection would have been served by having a more cohesive theme than 8 Roman lives. I think the theme could have been maybe the fall of the Republic, and taken out earlier lives and added in people like Cicero. This edition did not have Cicero, or added in the second Cato. They didn't have that in this edition. Just kind of giving us multiple perspectives on the same event, I think would have made this a more cohesive collection. But The thing about this is, I only rated this 3 stars because the thing about a collection of biographies is you're always going to be more interested in some people than another. And that is absolutely the truth here. There were so many lives that were like spectacular to read because they're really interesting and dynamic people. And they're people that you want to learn about. Sulla, for example. I love Sulla. I could hear about him all the time. And so I really wanted his biography to be longer. But some other biographies, I won't say I was bored by, but I just wasn't as interested in them on a personal level. And so I was wishing those were shorter to make room for people like Sulla. I think you were also missing a key component of what makes Plutarch Plutarch by making this just a selection of Roman lives, because Plutarch's parallel lives are set up in such a way that you are reading a Roman figure paired with a Greek figure. So you're always reading 2 biographies, but he pairs 2 figures on moral grounds, on political grounds. And that's what makes this interesting, is that you're getting 2 different time periods, and then you're getting a discussion point. And that's kind of what Plutarch wanted. And I kind of think the modern way of splitting him up into Greek and Roman, I think it's kind of inauthentic to what Plutarch wanted. Now, if you're just reading this to get history, then you're probably more interested in one of the 2. You're wanting to read either Greek history or Roman history. So I do see why people do this, but I think if you're interested in getting Plutarch's perspective specifically, it would behoove you to have the person that he paired them with. I really do think so. This edition did something really nice in that it gave you an introduction to each biography before you got there. And so they did tell you which Greek he would have paired each Roman with and kind of why. In the amount of time that you gave us that introduction, we could have read the Greek life alongside it. So that was kind of my gripe here, but I really like Plutarch. Plutarch has always been my favorite of the ancient historians, and I'll be interested to see if that changes. I think I'm going to go with Suetonius next, and I just know Suetonius is good for just a fun time. So I really like Plutarch because he's quite serious, and he's my kind of historian because he just really gets in on a personal level, and he really likes the people that he's writing about. And so each individual biography, whether it is about the same event or not, he takes their side, the person that he's writing about. And I think that's refreshing, and I personally really love that. And so that's something about him that I've always respected. But I think this was a good translation. I think if you're looking to get into Plutarch, you could do worse. But I do think it's just kind of weird on this reread for me. I do think it's odd that we're splitting up the Greek and Roman lives, but I do think that probably has its purpose depending on what you're studying. So this was 3 stars for me. I feel like I graded it a little bit lower than I did the first time that I read Plutarch, but I would be interested to read an entire collection of kind of the Roman Republic's fall and the Civil War of Caesar. I would be really interested in a collection that just focused on the men involved in that. Like Brutus, we didn't get Brutus's biography here, which I thought was strange. And there are several other people that he wrote biographies of that were involved in this that I think it would have been interesting to see. Going hand in hand with reading more ancient literature this year, I am also reading historical fiction that has been inspired by the ancients, and I'm really having fun with this. But the book that I read this month is a book that I read with Erica Stevenson from the channel Moan Inc., which I will link to down below. We did a video discussion of this on her channel that I don't think has been posted yet as of the time that I'm posting this, and I will definitely link to that when it's up. But we read together Fire from Heaven by Mary Renault. And this is a classic of ancient historical fiction. This is about Alexander the Great. And I think Erica and I both really struggled with this, not to spoil our review on her channel too much, but we both really struggled with this. I think I enjoyed it more than she did. I gave this 3 stars, but I kind of feel like it was generous. It's definitely a 2.5 star for me. I think there are some real pluses to this. The writing is absolutely beautiful, which is what I have always heard about Mary Renault. A lot of people have recommended her to me over the years, specifically because of her prose style. And so I was really excited by that. And I do think it's true. I think her writing is really gorgeous. This is so slow. And I went into this mistakenly believing that this was all 3 books in a trilogy bound up together, and this is only book 1. And I think personally, this is a series that is probably better judged when you have read it all. I think it's probably something that you shouldn't judge based on its pieces. Because speaking personally, the most interesting part of Alexander's life is not his childhood, is not his early life. I think the second book in this trilogy would be by far the most interesting in terms of Alexander's life. I do think the characterization was interesting. The characterization is another place where I kind of had a critique. Alexander is given kind of Mary Sue-ness. Everyone loves him. He's gorgeous. He's beautiful. He has no flaw. Everything he does perfectly. And so there's really nothing there for us to critique in him. And I think that is valid. I really do. Coming from someone who is also a history nerd and who has her historical faves, I admire that because I can tell that Mary Renault just loves Alexander. She loves him. And so she wanted this to be a really positive portrayal of him. That is to the detriment of this book because Alexander is thus not very interesting. He's pretty one note. You know he's going to succeed. You know he's great at everything. But the characterization of his mother, who is one of my favorite women in the ancient world, Olympias, incredible. I mean, that's really why I gave this book 3 stars. She carried it on her back. But I think that's true in the historical narrative as well. She is genuinely one of the most interesting people who ever lived. So this was very middle of the road. Erica and I went into great detail on this because Erica is a classicist. And so we really got to dig into this from the historical perspective, which I thought was fun. So I will definitely link to our discussion down below when it is posted, but definitely go follow her channel. I also read Spare by Prince Harry this month, as I know the majority of the world did, and I basically recorded blow-by-blow thoughts on this in a vlog earlier in the month, so I'll link to that down below if you want to know my evolving thoughts on it. But I'll tell you honestly, my opinion on this has changed for the better since finishing it. Throughout the process of reading the book, I actually thought less of Harry. And I went into the book feeling very positively towards him and towards Meghan, and I still feel positively towards Meghan. If you read this book, Meghan has really nothing to do with it. I think you would think going into this that that's going to be a large part of the book is his relationship with her and thus their departure from the royal family, but it's really not. And I would say Meghan just doesn't figure into this very prominently at all. And where she does, I really feel sorry for her because one thing that this book does is it exposes the absolute stupidity of the procedures of the royal family. I am specifically thinking of a moment when Kate Middleton, apparently, I don't know if she was pregnant, I can't remember now if she was pregnant or if she had just had a baby, and she couldn't remember something, and Meghan was like, that's okay, you know, that's hormones. That's baby brain. And Kate was like, you don't know me like that. Like, how dare you? How dare you speak to me of my hormones? And I thought, are you serious? Like, that's just not something we discuss in the royal family. I said, are you serious? This is ridiculous. I mean, and a lot of this book just showed what they go through and what they have to do is absolutely ridiculous. And I respect Harry for that. In fact, I respect Harry a lot for what he had to say in this because I think he was pretty upfront and honest about the fact that I won't say he was bigoted, though he kind of was, but he was very sheltered. And I think he recognized that after getting into a relationship with Meghan. He had never been in a place to recognize what the royal family did and what it stood for from kind of a social perspective as well as a political perspective. So I respect him for being honest about the fact that he had his shortcomings and that he didn't know everything. But on the other hand, this book is a lot of him not taking responsibility for things. He doesn't really interrogate his trauma in a great way either. In fact, I spent a lot of this book worried for him, and it got better towards the end, definitely when he found a great therapist. And so I just think part of this book must have been a therapeutic exercise for him to just write this stuff down. And I appreciate that for what it is, but it made me uncomfortable. We learned too much about him. I know too much about him at this point, but I feel far more positively about it after the fact because there are moments that I really reflect on. There was a moment where he talked about them refusing to give him and Meghan and their children security when they left the royal family. And he said, well, this is security that I have needed since birth because I was born into this family, which wasn't my choice. You know, just because I'm leaving this family does not mean that I'm not still internationally recognizable. And I felt really sorry for him there because I hadn't thought about it that way. And one thing is for sure, William, I mean, William comes off bad in this. I would love to know his perspective on things, but from this portrayal of him, William is petty. I mean, he is just so petty, and I don't like him at all. I don't like him at all after reading this. That was my fear. I knew when I read this that I would walk away with different opinions, and my opinions on William are just, in the drain. But my opinion on Charles, believe it or not, has gone up. I really like Charles. After reading this, I really like Charles. I really respect him because he's just a history nerd at heart. He's just a history nerd. But I think this book was interesting. I really think it was interesting because we all were talking about it at the same time and everyone was pulling out something different. For me, what was interesting is that Harry outright says, I'm not interested in history and I'm not interested in the history of my family at all, but he is very much interacting with it throughout the book. I just thought the book was fascinating. I rated it 3 stars initially. I bumped it back up to 4 because I've certainly thought about it. Since finishing it, it is a book that has stayed fresh in my mind. We then have my most anticipated release of the year, How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. What can I say? I mean, really, what can I say? This book was fantastic. It really was. I think on an objective level, several of his other books are definitely better than this one. To fully disclose my thoughts, I did rate this 5 stars. And did it deserve it? Probably not, because I've rated 2 of his other books 5 stars, and I think objectively this is the least of the 3. But I just thoroughly enjoyed this. I have so much fun with his writing. It cannot be overstated just how much fun I have reading him. And I feel like a lot of the time, especially since being on BookTube, I have been more in the classics realm and reading books that are more for educational purposes, frankly, than for enjoyment. And books like this remind me why I've always loved reading. This is why I love reading, is books like this. And they're a dime a dozen, truly they are. They're very, very hard to find. And I am just so happy that I found him because I have thoroughly enjoyed 90% of what I've read by him. There is a book that I'm going to talk about later in this video I read by him that I was not impressed with, but I have thoroughly enjoyed everything that he has released in the past few years. This is about a brother and a sister who really don't like each other coming together again to sell their parents' house after they die under mysterious circumstances, and weird things are happening in the house. Now, to tell you something, depending on what you're creeped out by, this has a lot to do with dolls. So if you're really creeped out by dolls, this might not be one to pick up. I kind of am creeped out by dolls, so I appreciated this because it did have a creep factor for me that a lot of his books don't have. Specifically for me, the thing about dolls is Poltergeist. The film Poltergeist, I saw that very young, and I'm talking about the clown doll. I know y'all know what I'm talking about. The clown doll? You know. But that is kind of what this reminded me of, but it also reminded me of Goosebumps by R.L. Stine, which is my bread and butter. That's what I grew up on. And so this really reminded me of the dummy in Goosebumps. I mean, it had everything. This was camp, but it was also just really fun. It was really heartfelt. That's what I love about Grady Hendrix. He pays a lot of attention to his characters and specifically to their relationships, to the point you're engaged more in kind of the family dynamics here, more so than you are what's going on in the house. And I think that's true for him in the majority of his novels. You get to the point that you care about the characters' relationships with each other, their friendships, far more than the creepy stuff that's going on. And that's great horror for me. If I'm not invested in the characters, if I'm not scared for them, I'm really not scared. This was just an absolute delight to me, and it will definitely appear on my favorite books at the end of the year. Another of my favorite books of the year, in fact, my favorite book of the year so far, is The Villa by Rachel Hawkins. This book is a dual timeline narrative, partially about 2 writers in the modern day, but it is also partially about a group of musicians in the 70s where one of them is killed under mysterious circumstances at a villa in Italy. And that storyline is specifically a retelling of Mary Shelley Percy Shelley and Lord Byron spending their summer at a villa in Switzerland where Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. And this is reinvented to be that the Mary Shelley character kind of wrote something akin to The Exorcist, like a horror breakthrough novel of the 70s. This book is absolutely brilliant because of that, because Rachel Hawkins put in her research. Everything about this was so perfect in terms of that retelling. Even the modern storyline with the two writers also functioned in a way as a retelling of Mary Shelley's life. It was absolutely incredible. And one thing that I want to celebrate this book for is that it wasn't only a love letter to Mary Shelley, it was a love letter to her stepsister, Claire. And Claire is a figure from the romantic circle that never gets any attention because she just desperately wanted to be one of them. She really wanted to be talented, she wanted to write and publish, and basically nobody paid her any attention, nobody gave her the time of day. She is the third wheel in Percy and Mary Shelley's relationship. She definitely had an affair with Percy Shelley, and she also had an affair with Lord Byron, but she has nothing to her name the way that the rest of the people in this circle do. And what I think was really great is just a minor spoiler in this book is that the Claire character released an album that apparently was very successful and that women really responded to. And I thought that was so wonderful that Rachel Hawkins gave Claire something. I went back at the end to see the For You note for Mary and Claire. It just really was touching. And I really enjoyed this book for that. I don't know if it was about anything else, if I would have given the book 5 stars. It's a fun ride. It's a bit of a thriller, but I would say it's not a murder mystery. I've seen some reviews where it seems like people went into this thinking that that's kind of what it was going to be. You know who is killed and you know who did it. So it's really interesting, the setup for the book, but truly this book is just a love letter to Mary Shelley and to Claire Clairmont, and that is what makes it so brilliant. I do think Rachel Hawkins is a little bit hard on Percy Shelley. I really do. I do think she's a little bit hard on him, but I'm partial to him and I recognize that. I basically got the physical copy because I wanted to annotate it, and I can't wait to reread this. I mean, I'm going to reread this and annotate it and tab it. I really cannot wait. It was so good. It was just everything to me, the characterization and the way that she analyzed their relationship. It was so fascinating. And especially placing them and the circle of the romantic, specifically Byron, into the placement of a rock star. Incredible. I mean, galaxy brain. This woman's playing 4D chess. Dr. Polidori, John Polidori, who wrote The Vampire, is a figure who was there who also doesn't get a lot of attention. And I think this book also wanted to shine a light on him. Really interesting how he functioned within the group, especially given what happened to him historically. And Claire in real life, I feel like I have called a groupie. And this book outright designs her that way, designs her characterization that way, as like a groupie of Byron and Shelley. And I just thought it was fantastic. I mean, truly, I cannot think of a thing I would have improved in this. The ending was absolutely incredible. I mean, really, this is easily the best book of the year. Nothing's going to top it. I'm saying it now. My favorite book of the year. It is a book that I wish I had written. Then I read Horrorstor by Grady Hendrix. So this is kind of set in a haunted IKEA. And you might can tell from that I really didn't enjoy this. The book is very short. To be frank, it is too short to get a handle on anybody. What I think is brilliant about Grady Hendrix's writing in other books is that the characterization is so good. And here I definitely felt like the characterization just fell by the wayside. He was not interested in the characters as much as telling the story. What I did really like was the metaphor of the haunting at this IKEA-like store, which functioned as kind of like a prison, was haunting this IKEA. And so maybe it was a bit heavy-handed to compare retail to being in prison, but I kind of liked it. I thought it was honest and I thought it was upfront about retail work in an interesting way. But the characters, for me, there was just no investment with. If anything happened to any of them, I was like, oh well, you know, I just didn't care. And for me, that's just imperative in a horror story, is for me to care for the characters and be invested in them. And I just really wasn't. I think had the book had an extra 100 or so pages, then maybe it would have given me that. So I gave this 2 stars. This is the only Grady Hendrix that I would say has been a major disappointment to me, though I wasn't the biggest fan of the Final Girl support group. But this one for me was just very lackluster. And if you're looking for a place to start with him, it's not here. Well, maybe it is if you really want to read his worst and then move up to his best, because I think everything else will be an improvement on this. There's still a book of his that I haven't read that I am interested in getting to very soon, because I really just want to have read everything that he's written. And I'll probably do a video on all of his books when I'm done with that one. So I'm looking forward to that, and I do hope that it's better than Horrorstor. So those were all of the books that I read in January. I would love to know if you have read any of these down below. I would love to know the best book that you read in January, but that's going to be all for me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Goodbye.